But the Democrats do have an opportunity to slow the roll right now. Today, and at the time in which we're saying this, we don't know the outcome of this. But Mitch McConnell is looking for unanimous consent to adjourn the Senate and return in, where are we today? In about 2 weeks, a little bit less. As you know, there are multiple Republican senators now, 3, Mike Lee, Tom Tillis, Ron Johnson, who are sick with COVID. There may be others that are quarantining. I suspect they should be. But the Democrats, one Democrat, doesn't have to be Chuck Schumer, although I imagine Chuck Schumer weighs in pretty heavily on this. One Democrat can say, we need to check whether there's a quorum. That's all they need to say. Quorum check. And then the process starts, and you need to have a quorum in the Senate. And if no Democrats show up, and Vice President Pence does not count for quorum, then you need 51 senators showing up. You need all the Republican senators to show up to move things forward. You can still have committee hearings without quorum, at least in the broad Senate. I don't know if you can do committee hearings by remote, because the Senate, unlike the House, has not set up any type of mechanism for proxy voting. The Democrats can throw some real gum into the works, as it were. It's just going to be a question if they have the will, whether it's important enough to slow the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett. Even if they lose this fight, there is a lot to be gained in its loss. If they are able to push it to after the election into the lame duck, even if Mitch McConnell's able to ram it through then, which I don't think is a 100% guarantee. That's the reason why he wants to move it now. There's all sorts of things I think we've seen just in the past week that can go sideways. There's only one way the Democrats are going to be able to address the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, and that is to reform the Supreme Court, to expand the number of members on the Supreme Court, maybe to institute, after that, term limits. There needs to be a reformation of that process. And we will find out as of tomorrow whether the Democrats are going to decide to actually try and attempt to do that. They can, or they can just avoid the whole thing and just hope that it's a good fodder for the election. But this is a perfect example of why the Supreme Court is so important. In 2013, the Roberts Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. This was the pre-clearance provision that caused, I think it's about 14 states, maybe about 16 counties around the country, including counties in New York City, even. Most people think it's just mostly in the South, and it is mostly in the South, but there's still other counties that had a history of disenfranchising minorities in terms of their vote. And so any changes that they wanted to institute in terms of their voting process had to be pre-cleared by the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. Even though the Voting Rights Act had been reauthorized by a Republican-controlled Senate as recently as I think it was 2007, sometime around there, the Roberts Court said essentially racism is not around in a institutionalized way. This is unfair to those states. The concept of preclearance we're okay with, but not the way that it's done here. So it's done. Preclearance is done. Literally almost every single state that was no longer under the preclearance provision changed their voting laws in such a way to disenfranchise minorities. Huge rash of these. Then 2 years ago, I think it was in 2018, the case came out of Texas. You had, it was Abbott v. Perez. And essentially what Abbott v. Perez said was that, okay, we're going to give all the benefit of the doubt to the lawmakers that their intent to be racist is really not there. Even if like it's been determined that they've done stuff in the past that is racist, and that even if the same thing that they did was racist in its result, we're just going to give them the benefit of the doubt about intent. So it became virtually impossible to prove racist intent, except for in the absolute most egregious cases, right? Like I don't know, the governor comes out and says, listen, we're going to be very racist in the way that we draw these lines, and that's that. There is now a new case that the Supreme Court has taken. It came out of Arizona. Mark Joseph Stern wrote about it back in January of this year when it was heard. The Ninth Circuit of Appeals. There were two different cases, really, two different aspects of this. One, Arizona Republicans passed a law that basically said, if you vote in a precinct that is not yours, then those ballots are going to be thrown out. Now, understand, this is not on its face. It's like, well, why can't people get it together? There's multiple situations in, like, say, Maricopa County, where you drive by multiple polling places to get to yours. They were specifically have played around with where people vote to make it at the edge of their district. Even if the voter is eligible to vote, regardless of, even if they voted for the right positions in a provisional ballot, the ballot is discarded. Arizona discarded over 35,000, almost 40,000 votes by registered voters from 2008 to 2016. Exponentially more than any other state. And overwhelmingly people of color. The rate of this type of voting, they call it OOP, out of precinct voting, in Pima County was 100%, 150% higher for Hispanics, 80% higher for blacks, 74% higher for Native Americans than for white voters. Voting Rights Act says that if there's a disparate impact on minority voters, then it is de facto racist and is must be struck down. Maricopa County, where 60% of Arizonans reside, slashed the number of polling places by 70% between 2012 and 2016 as part of this program, essentially. And this appeals court, Ninth Circuit, overturned it. There was another provision, HB 2023, which prevented community organizers from collecting absentee ballots and turning them into election officials. There's been no evidence of any shenanigans or any widespread fraud or anything like that. In 2011, when Arizona first tried to pass it, the state's election director admitted to the Department of Justice that it was, quote, targeted at voting practices in predominantly Hispanic areas. And the DOJ was going to say, like, well, you don't get preclearance for that. So Arizona pulled back. But as you know, preclearance has subsequently been destroyed by the Supreme Court. They ended up passing that law. It was struck down by the Ninth Circuit in January. And now it's going to be heard by the Supreme Court of the United States. There was someone working in Ronald Reagan's civil rights division of his Justice Department, I don't know, 40 years ago, in the 80s, who had a problem with that so-called results test, right? Where you don't need to prove racial intent, racist intent to find these laws. racist in practice. You just need to see a result that is disparate, where it impacts people of color more than it does white people in terms of disenfranchising them. That's the third prong of the Voting Rights Act. We had the preclearance, we had the racial intent, and we have the racial results test. There was a guy working in Ronald Reagan's administration fighting against the results test. He wanted Reagan to veto the law establishing the results test. And that guy who wrote all those memos was John Roberts. So when they get, now it's 5-4. I mean, that could be all they wrote. When they get 6-3, excuse me, it's 5-3. When they get to 6-3, forget about it. They're going after the Voting Rights Act. It is really the primary vehicle in which Republicans can win national elections, is to disenfranchise a lot of voters. We will be talking more about this and more about hopefully what the Democrats do in the Senate today and for the rest of the term in terms of slowing this roll. But that is our time today.